I'd never done any TV whatsoever, so I was learning on the job before millions of people. I felt intimidated in front of the camera to begin with, and it made my presentational style very low-key. Not long after I started, Melody Maker did a review, describing me as Whispering Bob, a label that's stuck ever since. The quid pro quo with the BBC was that we had no substantial budget, but we had freedom to experiment. Many American bands who had never been seen in the UK, including Little Feat, Bonnie Raitt and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, made their first showing on Whistle Test. For me, the best of all were Bob Marley and the Wailers. They were ridiculously good, creating such an atmosphere in the studio. They were totally stoned. Another thrill was a very eccentric Captain Beefheart. He virtually took over the control room, as if he was producing the entire show. The spotlight of aggression wore me down. Bob Harris. Photograph BBC. When the New York Dolls came on, I was criticized for describing them as mock rock. I'd grown up with the Rolling Stones, so to me they were like a tribute band, basing themselves on something I'd heard before. I met David Johansen, the lead singer, years later. But far from holding a grudge, he said it was the best thing that could have happened because it gave them notoriety. As for Roxy Music, with a huge exception of Brian Eno, I thought they were so arrogant and dismissive of their fans. Unfortunately, a perception developed that we were against punk and new wave because, unlike Top of the Pops, we were an album show, and punk bands were, to begin with, only releasing singles. But the spotlight of aggression on me did wear me down. For a while after I left, I didn't want to talk about the show, but now I'm so proud of the musical archive we built, one that is still regularly plundered by BBC4 on Friday nights. Annie Nightingale, presenter, had done other shows with the Whistle Test production team, so I suppose I was the go-to person when Bob stood down. I had no problem with punk. I'd been playing it on Radio 1 since 1976. The bands knew me, but a lot of them, like The Clash, had refused to be on the show because it represented everything they were trying to overthrow. But we didn't change overnight. We still had prog bands on, and I was a huge fan of King Crimson. I loved it when a band came on and misbehaved. Annie Nightingale on the Old Grey Whistle Test in 1979. Photograph BBC Photo Library. I had this jokey style because I wanted to be encouraging to the bands, a lot of whom were very inexperienced. They'd only get one rehearsal before the live take, in this very cold studio, often with no audience. But everything went wrong when Gary Newman came on with his band Tubeway Army. This was a big break for them, and they'd brought their own set, made of bits of polystyrene. The fire officer didn't like it and started spraying it with fire retardant, adding to the tension. Then when the camera swung round and knocked over half the props, hysteria took over. I was laughing to try and calm things down, but Newman told me later he never forgave us for that because he had felt so nervous. I loved it when bands came on and misbehaved. The Damned performed Smash It Up, and then smashed all of their instruments, followed by the entire set, to the point where they were looking round to see if there were any mic stands they had missed. Then there was the time Jeff Beck agreed to be interviewed only if his plugger walked naked across the studio playing a pair of bagpipes while we carried on talking. It'd been slightly tipped off something was going to happen. I wanted people watching on TV to turn round and say to each other, "Did you see what happened then? A naked man just walked across the set." Bob Harris Country is on Radio 2. Annie Nightingale is part of Radio 1 Vintage from the 30th of September to mark the station's 50th birthday.